our discussion, what is needed for the development of business competition. This event was prepared by a coalition of civil society organizations, and I am Glib Vyshlinskiy, Executive Director at the Center for Economic Strategies. We will have 4 speakers, Ukrainian colleagues and our colleague from the United States, and we are going to discuss 4 main issues. These are natural monopolies and markets, and whether the competition is possible there, and how to provide this competition at the maximum level, and whether anti-monopoly legislation of Ukraine is effective, and should we develop further the institutional capabilities and the regulatory limitations, and what we should do with it, how to limit them, and also how to introduce equal opportunities for the participants of the market when many Ukrainian enterprises belong to state. And I give the floor to Yulia Kovaliv, First Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Firstly, I would like to thank to Glib and Center of Economic Strategies that together with their colleagues from Antimonopoly Committee, they work on further reforming of competitive environment, because we believe, and this is the team of the ministry, we declared it last summer, that this is the basic principle to provide openness and competitiveness in all sectors of the economy. And Gleb has already told us about important issues, and we gathered with our colleagues and we spoke about priorities in our work, because in anti-monopoly community and at the ministry and in many governmental bodies, there are many different vectors of tasks and different sectors that need reforming. And when we spoke about competition and policy in the sphere, we saw our task to prioritize our work and to focus on some areas, and to work together with the committee and expert community to focus our efforts in order to show quality changes in regulating markets and introducing competition through different mechanisms. And firstly, I would like to say that Anti-Monopoly Institute was created and has special status envisaged by the Constitution, and it demonstrates, especially when its members were changed, it shows good results. And also here we are grateful to our colleagues that we can discuss these issues now at the expert level. And as to competition, Gleb has already told us that we have lack of competition in many markets. Firstly, these markets are not reformed. These markets are in transformation, in transition period between Soviet-era regulation, and they are on the way to liberalization. And in many markets, there are many state enterprises. And for 20 years, the attitude was towards them not like to business, but as some governmental functions, but these are just economic entities. So in energy sphere, in oil and gas sector and transport, there competition is possible if we reform the markets. And the initiatives of the government to liberalize gas market, and also there are draft laws that will change the rules of game on electricity energy market. And next step is further liberalization of the market of railway transportation and creation of independent regulator there. And these things will create competition because we are lacking in the sphere, because no player can enter the field now. And as to state share in the economy, here we continuously support position of reducing the number of state enterprises, and the new government during the first meeting, and this is the 5th attempt to submit the draft law that reduces the number of those entities that should not be privatized. So we expect that people's deputies will support our ideas, because we have many state enterprises, and it is prohibited to privatize about 1,700 state enterprises, and many of these enterprises, they are liquidated as economic entities. And the next question is natural monopolies, and here we go to infrastructure sector, and also changes has been made in oil and gas industry, and also regulators will play an important role. Now we have regulating in energy sector, and the same regulators should be created in infrastructure sphere, because the system of regulation should be like in that market. So we expect the adoption of law on energy regulation that will increase the institutional capabilities of this body, because this is quasi body that is for regulating the market, and to establish better conditions where these monopolies were established. So also the activity of Antimonopoly Committee in the markets where competition exists, but sometimes the players in the market, they try to establish some coalitions, or some they try to associate among themselves and to create better conditions for themselves. And here the work of Anti-Monopoly Committee and increase of its status and its capabilities and access to improve access to information, and also they should carry out investigations, because there are some really powerful players in the market that create coalitions, and there are so the third block is to increase institutional capability of the committee, both from the side of legal responsibilities and authorities. They should have the right to get information, and also taking some investigative actions, and this will help to react on the situation when the players tries to maximize their profit by violating legislation on competition. And my colleagues work actively together with international organizations, and we are grateful to our American and European partners. And together we work on the changes to the legislation that will allow the opportunity to Anti-Monopoly Commission to provide it with more authority. And we can effectively work on the provision of competition in the markets, because competitive markets, they will allow to get more companies in the market, quality services for consumers, and as a result to get increase in the economy as on the whole. Because those markets that are monopolized, there we see some distortions and ineffectiveness, because it's very difficult for the state to regulate such big sectors. That's why if less entities are under regulation and other will work in market conditions, and there is a term economic distortion, we will decrease this economic distortion in such a way. So our view, and I believe that our colleagues from Antimonopoly Commissions share our opinion. So we believe that the major tasks are to follow these three directions. Thank you. Yulia, thank you for this introduction.
Framework introduction about the public policy in this area, and thank you for presenting the vision of the Ministry of the competitive policy. And as far as I mentioned, that Anti-Monopoly Committee had started research about those measures which might allow Ukraine to strengthen competitiveness in the markets. I'm very pleased to introduce Marta Kuzmyn, a senior economist from the Center for Economic Strategy, who will describe our vision of the issue. Why we believe this topic is important. There are several standard statements about the competition. The competition means a lower price for goods and services. Competitiveness also stimulates to innovation, which results in economic growth and improving of the well-being of people. This approach is proved by practice. In Australia, in mid-1990s, they strengthened competitiveness. They took measures to strengthen competitiveness, which resulted in 3% annual growth of GDP, which was extremely good in the situation at that time, because neighboring Asian countries were in crisis. The unemployment was curbed, and it was around 5%. Which also brought Australia to the number of most developed countries like the United States. Having analyzed situation in Ukraine, we have decided about 4 major measures or steps which would allow to strengthen the situation with the competitiveness in Ukraine. So these are natural monopolies in neighboring markets, and a competitive behavior of companies, regulatory limitations, and the fourth I haven't noticed. As for the sectors where we have natural monopolies, are as follows: oil and gas sector, heating and electricity, transition of electricity, and neighboring markets, oil and gas supplies, electricity generation, etc. Why do we believe that the additional public policy in this area is needed? There is the competition in those sectors is absent. The reform of oil and gas sector has already started, but customers cannot select their energy suppliers as of today. Also, regulated tariffs do not cover the cost of generation. We have very depreciated and very capital facilities, and a very low level of services delivered, just like in railway transport. This absence of competition resulted in a situation that even in private companies, for example, in energy sector, in Oblenerga, there are no investments into the modernization and development. That's why we believe that for natural monopolies and neighboring markets, we should carry out a comprehensive reform to strengthen competition in the neighboring markets, to ensure equal access to infrastructure of natural monopolies, and to stimulate private investments to those sectors. To carry out all those tasks, it is important to have a strong regulator regulating the tariffs in those sectors. The next aspect of our attention, this was anti-competitive behavior of a company. When we look at the Ukraine's position in the rating of anti-competitive behavior of companies, we occupy like 199th position. The degree of domination of the companies in the market, the effectiveness of anti-monopoly policy, we occupy the very low positions. To understand why we can find Ukraine in so low positions, we should look at the major results, major parameters of the Anti-Monopoly Committee work. And this table represents the fact that in Ukraine, Anti-Monopoly Committee deals with a huge number of cases which are of low importance for the market, and this prevents the committee from dealing with really serious problems, with really serious cases which substantially deteriorate the competition in the country. What do we suggest to do to this end? We suggest to strengthen the independence of the Anti-Monopoly Committee. It has a special status, but during the last years, this agency experienced an exaggerated political influence, and we would like to prevent this in the future. Also, we think that it might be useful for the Anti-Monopoly Committee to shift to the risk-based approach, keeping in mind the limited resources which they have. We also have to change current legislation. Recently, the barrier values for the for concentration were passed, and even despite this, we believe that we should improve legislation. Also, the transparency of the Anti-Monopoly Committee activities should be strengthened. They do not provide any data about average period of the case, while everywhere in the world, this is believed to be the major indicator or KPI of the agency activity. We also think that proper systematization and catalog of the cases under investigation of the committee might provide transparent information for the experts. Also undue regulatory limitations for the competition. Of course, the Antimonopoly Committee should exist to force the companies to behave in civilized way. But when there are excessive limitations or barriers to enter the market, then this turns into barriers. When we look at the pharmaceutical sector, for example, in an ordinary pharmacy, seeing a lot of medicines on the shelves, you may think that the market functions perfectly. But if you compare the assortment of those pharmaceutical products with France, we would found that the assortment is much more limited. When we compare the prices for pharmaceutical products in Ukraine to the similar products in Georgia and Hungary, which are not far from Ukraine, we would find that they are much more expensive. That's partially due to the difficulty to register new medicines, which recently were more liberalized. So until recent times, the companies were not interested to register some very specific medicines for specific and rare diseases in Ukraine. Okay, but recently, happily, in this area, we reached some progress in legislation. But in general, our regulatory environment is excessively regulated, and this prevents many companies from entering the market. We think that our institutional filters are very low capacity. We have the law on Ukraine about the state policy in economic activity. We have the state regulatory service. We have the Antimonopoly Committee, which have to supervise and prevent a situation when excessive regulation hinders development of business. But nevertheless, all those institutions are rather weak in carrying out those functions. What we would like to suggest, we would suggest to use the OECD methodology, the impact assessment on competition. I think this methodology is very good, and it is quite easy to understand whether any legislative initiative will create problems for the competition in business or not. Also, in the past, we had some attempts to carry out deregulation in the country, but in result of each new attempt, regulatory authorities produced new regulatory acts, and the business had business received nothing. And the next part of our work is competitive neutrality, which means that the company should follow some specific rules acting in the market. Those rules could be distorted by the state. The government may provide credit guarantees, establish some rules in favor of some companies, etc. Or they may force the government enterprises to carry out some non-profitable functions which are not profitable for the state companies, and this forced function puts the state enterprise into unbeneficial position against other actors in the market. In our country, it's also possible to get support from the state to some private companies. So this aspect of the competitive neutrality provides that taxes should be paid equally by all the companies, but we definitely know that VAT is compensated or paid back to some companies earlier than to others. Sometimes the companies have to split to pay lower taxes, while other big companies do not split into associated companies to pay lower taxes because of their ethic norms, rules, etc. What could be done? Privatization could be done. We should get rid of the state enterprises. We should get rid of the idea that the government should interfere into the work of some companies. We have different suggestions how this could be done. This could be done via privatizations, corporate governance, tax neutrality, regulatory neutrality, the debt neutrality, and transparent public procurement. Here we would advise to establish a special broad council to tackle this problem. Thus, we believe that full-fledged state policy towards competitiveness entails not just improvement of the Antimonopoly Committee work, also strengthening of the regulatory policy, and the introduction of the competitive neutrality principle at the state level. Thank you, Marta. Thank you for your framework presentation. Now I would like invite to the microphone our colleague from the United States, Mr. Russell Pittman, is Director of Economic Research from U.S. Department of Justice. Mr. Russell has been staying in Ukraine for almost 7 weeks and delivering his course in the Kiev School of Economics. Mr. Pittman also participates in a lot of discussions around the subject going on in Ukraine, and we are happy to use this opportunity to use his expertise on the competitiveness, strengthening competitiveness based on his huge experience in this area and based on the experience of the United States.
You're an honor to be on this part of this important event and part of this distinguished panel. As Gleb mentioned, I am in Kiev teaching at the Kiev School of Economics on my own time, but my day job is that I work for the U.S. Ministry of Justice, Department of Justice in the Antimonopoly Division, Antitrust Division, which is all by way of saying that I'm required to begin my comments by saying the views expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Department of Justice. I don't know whether my government colleagues on the panel are supposed to say that or not, but I'm supposed to say it. I think they're bosses and they don't have to say it. I'm not a boss, so I have to say it. I wanted to switch gears here a little bit, although I think we'll probably be talking about all these topics that the first two speakers have been talking about. And I want to focus on one of the items on the agenda, which is the natural monopolies. Because I think there's a lot of international experience that Ukraine can learn from as it seeks to reform and restructure and improve the productivity of its network industries. And I think it's important to understand that, at least according to the international experience, there may be very different outcomes in different sectors. And in some network industries, it has proven a challenge, but a surmountable challenge, to reform and bring in private money, attract private investment, and dramatically improve performance. In other network industries, the challenge has been much more difficult to surmount. And I want to contrast, because I think this is very applicable to the Ukrainian situation. I want to contrast in this light the international experience with the railway sector and the electricity sector. Start with the railway sector. That's the happy story. Restructuring railways around the world, there have been some problems. The UK had some famous issues when it broke up its railway sector to create competition. But in general, if you look at the experience around the world, it turns out that there are ways to create competition in freight railways. Not really in passenger railways. Passenger railways can't even pay their way anymore. They have to be subsidized for the most part. Freight railways, it turns out, can pay their way, and there are, in fact, multiple ways to restructure freight railways so that they dramatically improve their service for shippers. Now, the legislation that the Ministry of Infrastructure introduced into the Rada, which I believe Ukrzhaleznica has fought very hard, but the legislation that the ministry introduced into the Rada reflects one of the models, if you'll forgive the Economist jargon, one of the ways that we have seen competitions and private investment attracted into the railway sector. According to this legislation, which looks very much like what's happened in Poland and Romania and Germany, there would be competition among train companies over the monopoly track. So a company, it could be Ukrzhaleznica, it could be daughter of Ukrzhaleznica, it could be Ukrzhaleznica Infrastructure, would run the monopoly track, and different freight train companies would pay a fee, and satisfying the access rules and satisfying the technological requirements and so forth, could run their own locomotives and their own trains over the track. And if we look at the European experience, I would expect that if that legislation were enacted, that PKP from Poland would start running its trains on the tracks, that Deutsche Bahn would start running its trains on the tracks, that CFR from Romania would start running its trains on the tracks, and would compete with Ukrzhaleznica to supply service either to domestic shippers of steel and iron ore and coal, or bringing in imports, either one. And I believe, according to this legislation, Ukrzhaleznica could also compete. Sometimes the track company is prohibited from competing. That's a separate issue. But the other, again, according to the international experience, the other group of companies that might start running trains on the tracks would be the large shippers. So I'm going to try not to reflect too much ignorance of the Ukrainian economy, but a coal company like DTEK or a grain company like Kernel could say, you know what, I'm not satisfied with my service from Ukrzhaleznica or the service that Deutsche Bahn is offering. I'm going to run my own trains. And this is what's happened in Poland, in Romania, in Germany. And for all these reasons, shippers are much pleased, are much satisfied with the outcome of the reforms. And the reforms have attracted a lot of private investment into locomotives and rolling stock. Now, There's a separate way to restructure railways that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here. I've written about it in Vox Ukraine if you're interested. That is more what we have done in, well, it's the old United States and Canadian model, but more recently Mexico and Brazil and Argentina have adopted it. And that is to divide the freight railways into vertically integrated companies and systems that compete with each other at common points. So for example, there might be a Western Ukrainian railway, but it might compete with a Central Ukrainian railway at Odessa and Dnipropetrovsk and Kiev or something like this. It's a little bit more complicated. The advantage of this alternate strategy is that private investors have been given not ownership, it's not privatization, but it is long-term control over the infrastructure. And as a result, they have invested a great deal in the infrastructure. That's the weakness of the first model that I mentioned, is that it still requires the state to maintain the infrastructure or to figure out a way to maintain the infrastructure as the Ukrainian legislation seeks to do. But it's more of a challenge with the first model. The second model, let's call it the Mexican model, has been very successful in attracting private investment directly into the infrastructure as well as the locomotives and rolling stock. Okay, so that's the good news side of the market. It turns out that if you look at countries about the size, you know, in the class size of Ukraine, whether it's Poland and Romania next door or Mexico across the ocean, there are ways that countries have succeeded in dramatically transforming their old, unproductive, overstaffed state monopoly railways. Okay. The bad news side of the ledger is the electricity sector. It turns out to be much more difficult than all we smart reformers thought to create competition in electricity. We were all very confident when we were passing new legislation and regulation in the 90s.
Do not unmotivate us to do it.
Well, I want you to not get your hopes up too high. Because it turns out that it's more of a challenge than we realize to actually have true competition. Now, there can be successful reform, and so I want to make that distinction. But to actually have really competitive wholesale generation markets turns out to be a lot more difficult than we reformers thought. And David Newberry, who's sort of the dean of British analysts of all this, has said, you know, it turns out if you look around the world, there's a single factor that determines mostly whether you have effective competition in electricity. And that is, do you have a whole lot of cheap natural gas? If you have a whole lot of cheap natural gas, you can have a whole lot of small natural gas plants and they will compete with each other. If you don't have a whole lot of cheap natural gas, if you have natural gas that in fact comes with political problems, the experience suggests you don't get very competitive markets. And this is particularly true in a fairly large country like Ukraine, where the long-distance transmission lines are not in great shape. And so when demand is high, the transmission lines get congested, and generators in the West cannot get their power to the East, even if there's a lot of demand there, because there's congestion on the lines. And so the problem is, and again, I'm not saying reforms can't help, but reforms, it's been very hard to create true competition in wholesale generation markets if you are, as in Ukraine, mostly nuclear and coal. If you have a large country with deteriorated long-distance high-voltage transmission lines. What you're likely to get if you open things up to these hourly auctions that everybody likes is a lot of monopolies. And maybe that can be better than what you have, but it's not competitive, and it's a real challenge to make that work. So that's sort of, you know, we have all these jokes in the United States, maybe you have them here. I've got good news and bad news. The good news is, I think if the Rada enacted either the railways legislation that it has before it, or Pittman's alternative legislation, you could have, if Poland and Mexico are examples, you could have dramatically improved railway service. I think it's going to be much more difficult to create actual workably competitive electricity markets. The views expressed are not necessarily those of the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Дякую. Зараз повернемося до ситуації в Україні. І наш останній запланований виступ. Марія Ніжнік, перший заступник голови. Перепрошую. Останній запланований виступ на сьогодні. Марія Ніжнік, перший заступник голови Антимонопольного комітету.
The last planned presentation for today will be Maria Nizhnik, first deputy head of the Antimonopoly Committee of Ukraine, the main body which is responsible for competitiveness policy in Ukraine. Thank you for invitation to this event. I think that the Antimonopoly Committee tries to be a body which protects competition. We try to follow best international practices and to protect and develop competitiveness in Ukraine. So every day we ask ourselves the question how to develop competition in Ukraine. But as it was truly mentioned today, any attempt to strengthen competitiveness should cover three major aspects. There should be full-fledged state policy in place aimed at the development of this sector. There should be the policy of the state aimed at the development of competitiveness in general. The next precondition for strong competitiveness policy, there is availability of a strong regulator which supervises how the market actors apply the established rules in the market. And the third component of effective anti-monopoly policy is efficient activity of the Antimonopoly Committee, which possess real mechanism to ensure that all the actors in the competitiveness field comply with the rules established by the state. On behalf of myself, I would add the fourth element to this system. This is a strong judiciary in the country, which creates the trust that all the participants, all the stakeholders in the process would be adequately protected and will have adequate remedies in case of any complications. We all are interested to get the best services at the most optimal prices. Why competition is useful for the companies. The producers are interested to compete based on the fair basis. Thus, they will be able to use better and cheaper resources and to get access to the market, and thus to develop more successfully. Yulia and Marta before me mentioned four types of the market which we have. The first type are really competitive markets where we have structural precondition for the competitiveness and where there is a real competition. Then another type of markets are those where there are necessary preconditions, but in result of the activities of market actors, competitive markets are very much limited. In this second type of the market, the role of Anti-Monopoly Committee is very important. In this case, the Antimonopoly Committee becomes an arbitrator, a mediator between the market players and those who violate the rules. That's why we carry out public awareness campaign about competitiveness, targeting those companies and companies' leaderships who do not know enough about their role in strengthening competition. So, and now about competitive neutrality. The competitive neutrality is it should be based on the unprejudiced, non-discriminative approach to all the companies acting in the market. The next aspect is that thinking about development of competition, here we should act jointly with other regulators in the sectors. Here the major aim should be liberalization of the market, stimulation of the appearance of other market actors, and all possible methods to support the competition development. Also, I would like to mention the importance of the role of natural monopoly market regulators, and the Anti-Monopoly Committee should play its role here, stimulating sectoral regulators to facilitate the market access in their sectors. What are our major aspects of activity? We are targeting external effectiveness of the committee and the internal effectiveness of the committee. Today, we are obliged to publicize all the decisions made by the Anti-Monopoly Committee. We try to be as explicit as possible in making our decisions to allow people to understand why we have made the decision, what was the logic behind the decision, at what preconditions or at what situation analysis it was based. Recently, we had established a new department devoted. We have established Chief Economist's Office. And inside the committee, we try to change a paradigm. That is, not try to tackle the case of just one consumer, but to look at all the cases more systemically. When we think about improving our activities, is to define clearly what falls within our scope and what falls to the scope of other regulator. One of the KPI for our committee, which we recently adopted, is the economic effect of our work. That is the prices which are lowered in result of our activity. For example, last year we managed to decrease prices by 16 billion hryvnia, which I think is a good KPI against 63 million, which we require per year for our activities. Advocacy work of the committee. Advocacy work covers actually the broad explanation about our approaches and main principles of work. And the most important, which is a pretext of our today's discussion, is interaction with other government agencies on the development of competitiveness. And we met with the Ministry of Economy, representatives of the Center for Economic Strategies. I think that this is the first step in direction, a first step towards our joint program. Dear colleagues, do you have any comments, any remarks? And then we will shift to Q&A session.
I would like to add one more aspect. Our regulatory environment is one of the obstacles for development of competition when we are speaking about the regulation and doing business rating. All this has direct influence on consumers, markets, and business. And the last example of medicines and the decision on simplification of registration of medicines that the government adopted during its first meeting. This is one of the examples. But there are many things that limit competition and limit our ability as consumers to choose products in the markets. And the Ministry of Economy prepared these changes about the registration of medicines. And before registration, each medicine undergo tests, and there is and this test can last 110 days. So to follow all the procedure, any distributor or producer, for this producer, it took about a year to undergo this procedure. So we proposed that those medicines that were already registered for the use in the European countries and the United States, in Japan and Canada, those countries that have strong expert and regulatory bodies in the pharmaceutical area. So this registration will be made by the method of automatic acceptance of documents of registration in that countries. And the time for registration was reduced from 1 year to 30 days. And firstly, this reduces the terms. Then it make these medicines cheaper for distributors. So this obstacle is lifted for entering the market. And here there was a good slide on the number of registered medicines in Ukraine and those medicines that are in the European Union. And we may see that we have more opportunities to use from assortment of these medicines. And this is the example of how we as consumers are influenced by the competition in the market and negative influence of regulatory barriers for entering the market. So here is the example of 16th or 17th century in Great Britain when this struggle with monopoly started. And there were some different means how to fight this monopoly. Of course, aristocracy changed. And so do you have some other comments, or we will give the floor to our audience? So if you have some questions, please ask, maybe some comments. First, introduce yourself. Good afternoon, dear friends. I'm the head of council at the Antimonopoly Committee, and it happened so that in 1991, we formed this body, and I was the head of this committees for many years. So I'm very glad that I'm the participant of this discussion, because the issues that are raised here, these are the problems, modern problems, and there are markets where competition is needed, where we should create competition. And if we look at the markets and the share of such markets, the share is less than 50%, but the problem for today's situation, this is a big problem. That's why maybe during some time, and now there is time to reload competitive policy on the basis of the program about which Maria Vladimirovna told us and about which consultation started. So when this program will be completed, we will have final text that was worked on for several years, and there are some proposals for the institutions of civil society and also members of council at the Anti-Monopoly Committee. So this document, we should take this document and to look it through and to see what is useful there. And also, I would take the program, the first program that is unique, that we prepared and the Supreme Council adopted in 1993. And there was a structure of three major developments of competitive policy. The creation of competition, and this was an acute question because of demonopolization of the markets and also the work of Anti-Monopoly Committee for the competition where it exists now, and also anti-monopoly regulation where the market mechanism do not work. These are natural monopolies and some administrative relations. And if we look at other problems, they are in one of these three directions. And I believe, as they say, that new is long forgotten old. So who will prepare this program and who will structure it? This is not a matter of form, but a matter of essence. And I would like to present some proposals that would be interesting to you. So the first one, when we're speaking about some experience of realization of competitive policy, this is a strict differentiation between those bodies that should develop this policy, develop administrative acts, and Anti-Monopoly Committee, because it, as of today, is the main body in the sphere of competition. And as Monopoly Committee, Anti-Monopoly Committee is an independent regulator, an independent body that oversees and the sphere. So everything that is connected with the development of legislative acts and policies, this should be in the legislative, the priority of legislative body. And of course, the Ministry of Economy should be an active participant in these actions. So now the situation is like this, but in order not to have many obstacles, because you know that the program was the Anti-Monopoly Committee. They developed the first program, and this is necessary because Anti-Monopoly Committee should remain independent and have the opportunity to criticize and to provide proposals in the form of texts. And also it shouldn't be in the process of political coordination of policy of the government, because that should be the part of governmental policy. And also the second question that is raised, so the relationship of Anti-Monopoly Committee and regulatory bodies. I believe that in the last several years, in this issue, if we are speaking about such term as deregulation, there were some distortions. And I discussed this issue with the previous Minister of Economy, and we heard his speech and the policy the ministry carried out, and the principle of this guillotine of deregulation, or it is faulty in its essence, even if it concerns the lives of people, if the mechanisms of market do not work, so they cancel such regulation. And I believe that the ground for this should be professional approach. We should elaborate the principles of the deregulation. So where the market mechanisms do not work, or we should protect lives and health of people. And in other spheres, market and competition should rule, but it should not depend on some positions of some regulators who are not professional. That should be a governmental policy. And there we have some regulation that is necessary because all the world works like this. And where it is not needed, we should remove this. So what I didn't hear before, and what should we do with the sector that is still regulated? With those what should we do with those regulators? Because partly this problem is there is a special law on the natural monopolies, on the provision of the committee. So the problem is broader than that. We have commission on communication. Potentially, we have commission on transport, and we have financial regulators. We have national bank, and also different other bodies and regulators, dependent and independent regulators. We have many commissions, many agencies, many services that supervise the quality of products, but then they directly influence the behavior of entities. And we should make sure that this regulation should be transparent and of quality. And we were speaking about Antimonopoly Committee as regulator. All these provisions should be introduced for these regulators, and the state should carry out its functions transparently and professionally. And this is priority number one in this program, because the problem of Anti-Monopoly Committee, not because Anti-Monopoly Committee do not prioritize correctly. And when I was in office, we started to change. We had special investigation that dealt with this issue, the most important cases. And the problem was that when people come to you and they say that someone destroys them and remove them from the market, no matter what your priorities are, you should take their claim and review it. And there were 5 such requests for investigation. So, and there are many violations, and there are many complaints. And for example, in Germany, they also get many complaints, maybe 100 or 500 at best. So the lion's share of these violations is the fact that when state regulates some spheres, it is done inefficiently, because there was no, they just wanted to have some corruption income. And if we remove corruption, it doesn't mean that these bodies will become effective regulators. And we should take care that in these bodies there should be some professional personnel that should be selected through a contest, and there should be independent assessment of these bodies, because people are appointed, for example, for 7 years, or people work inefficiently. So people and government, they should be protected, because the government is responsible, and independent regulators, they can work for 7 years, for example, and only a prosecutor's office can remove them. So if the body is effective, they should continue their work. And there was a proposal on the creation of working group, and I believe that the work on the program will continue. And Anti-Monopoly Commission and the Ministry, they will have the opportunity not only when the document will be completed, but also they will cooperate in forming this document, and they gather all the proposals. And we have 51 NGOs, and all these resources can be used, and we can cooperate in this respect more effectively. So, as experience shows, prosecutor's office sometimes is a regulator in these processes. Do you have some questions? Dmitry Namumenko, Silniszy Razum Association. So I have a question of specific character, and I heard about it in Ms. Nizhnik's speech. You said that it is a very important issue of regulating competition, and it should be for all participants of the market. And I would like to know your opinion on the problem whether the decision of Anti-Monopoly Committee should these decisions be appealed, and how this reform can be done effectively. So thank you for your question. This is really an acute question. The position of Anti-Monopoly Commission was and is that courts have the competence to review the decision of Anti-Monopoly Committee, and this is the principle that Anti-Monopoly Committee is ruled by. And moreover, these responsibilities, they are in the law on Article 60, says that the court can review the decision, and we support the initiative on the review and the defense of rights of entity, but we believe that it should be the comprehensive approach, and there should be legislation developed that envisages all possible instances and all possible issues, and also to coordinate these issues with procedural codes in order to use it. So thank you, Maria.
Eugene Stewart. I'm project leader with an EU project here developing the public procurement and state aid regulatory systems in Ukraine. My apologies firstly for my poor Ukrainian. I think Russell's is probably better than mine at this stage.
No chance.
Just make a few general comments. This is an important agenda for Ukraine, and the right question is being asked: what needs to be done to improve competition in Ukraine? I'm Irish myself, and I can remember the early days of Margaret Thatcher when she was asking that question on her first days in office: what needs to be done to improve competition in the UK? And her answer was it was going to be tough medicine. And she was already talking about medicine. And everything that has happened in these reform processes in many countries over the last 20 years in particular has been an experiment, in my view, between the tough medicine of actually promoting more and more competition, making markets work better, and the ultimate danger of what Bon Jovi calls bad medicine, where it goes too far or the experiment goes off the rails in one way or another. In Ukraine at the moment, a lot is happening in this area, and certainly a lot is happening to improve the public procurement system, where one of the main objectives, quite simply, is to get more competition into procurement. There are questions of transparency and other issues also, but if you only have two bidders in a typical tender, you don't really have much competition. So the whole process of reform is trying to get more and more businesses to participate in public tenders. And that also involves building more and more confidence in the public service process, the public expenditure process in Ukraine, and so forth. What is particularly new and interesting, and not touched on in the discussion today, though, is the role that further regulating the government can bring to the process of improving competition in any country. On that I'm referring to a new system that is starting in Ukraine next year under the law on state aid to undertakings. Now, the basic idea is that if the state is just dishing out subsidies in a fairly random way, or on the basis of preferences, or without thinking things through in terms of the need or the volume of those subsidies, then you are immediately creating unacceptable distortions in most markets. Now, this doesn't have to be about the big ticket items like railways or the gas sector and things like this. It can be fairly day-to-day markets. The Ukrainian law very much mirrors the practice in the European Union that has been regulating state aid for the last 70 years, and developing it again, working on a tough medicine to bad medicine basis, trying to get it right and trying to get a balance between what the government should be doing and allowing the markets to work freely. And this is going to be an important part of the Ukrainian experiment starting next year. And by way of a general comment, I don't really have any questions for the panel. I think the Antimonopoly Committee of Ukraine is doing a very strong job in very difficult circumstances, and this will be an additional tool. But what will be further additional is that public authorities in Ukraine will now have a very distinct role in the whole process of making markets more competitive in Ukraine. They'd have to think twice in the future in respect of any policies that provide support to public or indeed private undertakings in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Прошу.
Добрый день, Романович Дмитрий.
Good afternoon, Romanovich Dmitry, National Council of Reforms. I have a comment to the previous comment about the guillotine. I wanted to state that this concept of guillotine, this has stopped in summer last year after discussions with European colleagues and after studying the mechanism. We do not envisage this guillotine starting from summer last year, and we have the concept of regulation in the framework of the process. Better Regulation Delivery Office was created, and the work is carried out in this direction. Of course, there are many regulations, and that should be cancelled. And the last initiative on medicines, it is close to cancellation, but this is the regulation that should be done. So if we need additional information, I won't take time from other participants. There is a question. Vitaly Knyzhansky, Day newspaper.
Vitaly Knyzhansky, Day newspaper. I would like to ask a question to the Antimonopoly Committee representative. What specific big cases are under your review now, and what effect do you expect to have from that big cases? As of now, we have one big case on gas with Gazprom. One is about transit of gas. The next years are also about gas supplies. As for the transit, the decision, the court verdict was already made, but not court verdict, the decision was made. And the next case will be abuse of monopoly position in the market by detect company based on the regulators' submission. Then about Ukr tobacco, company about abuse of monopoly position. We have one case about pharmaceutical market, about anti-competitive collusion among several companies. So the first objective of the Antimonopoly Committee is to put an end to the monopoly position of the company or to the anti-monopoly, to the anti-competitive activities of a company. Quite often we are able to assess our effectiveness based on the real decrease of prices. For example, with Gazprom, if in result of our activities, Gazprom will decrease its prices for Naftogaz or will increase its transportation fees. As of now, Gazprom had submitted their appeal to court, and we will meet with them in court. Laktionov Alexander from NAK Naftogaz. But I would like to ask a question just as ordinary citizen. Among all the cases you mentioned about petroleum products and oils and motor oils, the regulators respond on the minor changes in the market of petroleum, etc. I understand that Yulia also would like to comment from her reaction. Anti-Monopoly Committee also sees the signs of the real problem, and we have started our investigation about light oil products. 2 years ago, there was a decision of the Anti-Monopoly Committee when we defined several market participants who as exclusive monopoly members of the market. And currently, the committee tries to investigate whether they have monopoly dominating position or whether these are just separate players in the market. And also we investigate their coordinated actions of these companies. But we have not found any direct relations, any direct unity between the stations. But what do you think when the prices change within one night? I think we should strengthen the institutional capacity of the Anti-Monopoly Committee in terms of investigation. Actually, it's very difficult to investigate and to prove the collusion in the petroleum market, and currently, the committee is almost unable to do this. From other colleagues from regulators, we know that many anti-monopoly committees can do their own investigations. The half of violations in the anti-monopoly sphere are violations in the area of utility supplies, and this could be investigated by sectoral regulators, while anti-monopoly committee should be able to carry out investigation of the most important cases, and to this end, they should be able to carry out investigative operations. We have a very good team of the inspectors of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, but we should back them up with rather capable employees, support staff, and here comes the issue of the wages in the civil service, because we cannot demand from people working for their salaries that they will contribute fully. We have strengthened our economic department, Department of Investigations, and currently we try to carry out economic analysis, and in order to be able to prove that there were no business reasons, there were no economic reasons to raise petroleum prices over one night.
In my judgment, maybe the single most difficult job for anti-monopoly agencies is confronting tacit collusion. And your law addresses tacit collusion. My law, in fact, does not. If a concentrated industry of 3 companies, they all follow each other, they take action within 5 minutes, but there is no agreement, it's very, very difficult in any country in the world for a competition authority to go after them. Partly because if you go before a judge, the judge says, what am I supposed to do? Tell them not to read the paper? Tell them not to know what their competitors are doing? So it's one thing to say the competition agency should have tougher resources to be able to find collusion. Yes, that's an important job. We all agree that fighting collusion is very important. But another issue is that it's very, very difficult to prevent tacit collusion, even if the law says it's illegal. And it's one reason why I think many of us emphasize the importance of strong merger policy. Because once an industry gets very concentrated, those guys can act in tacit collusion, and they don't have to get together in a smoke-filled room and agree. They can follow each other. And it's very difficult for an agency to prevent that.
Thank you, Russell, for this comment.
Сидоренко Дмитро, інформагентство «Уніан». В мене питання до пані Юлії. Хотілося б почути плани і наступні.
I would like to hear from Yulia about further steps of the Cabinet of Ministers in reforming those sectors where there is natural monopolies. As for gas sector reform, gas market reform, we have now to make some more technical steps, some improvements in the code, gas transportation network, etc. As for the electricity market, the draft law, after the government was changed, was for the second time submitted to the parliament. We have been communicating with the parliamentary committee to speed up the first reading of the law and to speed up the passage of the law as soon as possible. But then it will be rather difficult to implement this law. It will be very difficult to introduce competition in the electricity market, more difficult than in the gas market. As for the reforming of the housing sector and utilities, jointly with the Ministry of the Regions, we decided that we should bring to order supplies of the utility services, specifically heating supplies, think how to involve investments. We work jointly with the European Bank on Reconstruction and Development. As for the infrastructure sector, we will continue reforming of the rail road transportation, and today we plan to reform Ukrzaliznytsia. We have started corporatization, and we plan to introduce best corporate management, like in Naftogaz, maybe. And at the same time, simultaneously, we will do the reforming of the railway transportation market. In course of restructuring Ukrzaliznytsia, we will see the positive influence of this reforming on the strengthening competitiveness in the market. As for the auxiliary market, so to say, they start to develop in energy, in gas supply market. Today we have around 15 independent gas suppliers, which we did not see back in 2015, when we expect that 18 months upon passage of the electricity law, we will see the first outputs of this law in the electricity market. Thus, we will see the first competitors there. And approximately the same period will be necessary for reforming of railway transportation. I did not wish to offer a comment to the comment, but 16 years ago we had a draft law about providing evidences for the cases, and we believe that now this law might be reviewed and passed, and this would allow the committee to cope with tacit collusions. We're concerned about state regulations. Just an example, in insurance sector, we have independent regulator. We have, a year ago, we had around 40 companies in the insurance sector. Now there are lower companies by 4%. The National Bank had also says that out of 400 companies working in the market, only 40 companies are operational. The rest are not working, and they also unfairly compete in the market. They just take money from people and then disappear. After crisis,
Постворювати додаткові регулятори, відділити.
after 2008, it was a decision to create additional regulators to regulate the rights of consumers, to ensure the rights of consumers from economic activity. That is, we need a fair competition. There is the mix of different types of companies, the real companies and shell companies. So we have the economy of the abused competition. The last question.
У мене запитання до пані Юлії.
My question is to Yulia. If you represent the cabinet of ministers here, then my question to you, whether you could convinced the Cabinet of Ministers that the Anti-Monopoly Committee should involve the Security Service of Ukraine and other law enforcement agencies. The Anti-Monopoly Committee can involve all those agencies to the investigation. Thank you very much. Let us sum up. Today we discussed many issues related to the competitiveness development. And the question now to you, what you see as number one priorities, top priority in order to make the real changes in the competition area happen. I would like to invite Russell to speak first, since you spent already 7 weeks in Ukraine.
That is a tough one. If I had to choose the single most important priority going forward, I think that in the many years I've been working in economic reforms in this part of the world, one of the things that really strikes me as I work in Kyiv right now is how good the team of reformers that you have is. That reformers like these two ladies that I have on my left, their colleagues, other people in other ministries, other people in think tanks, I think Ukraine is extraordinarily lucky right now with the number and level of expertise and energy of its reformers. Now the question is, does that get us a good solution? And of course nobody knows. If I had to pick one thing that I think will determine whether it gets us a good solution, I think it's the improvement and implementation of the rule of law. The strengthening and independence of the court system, the defeat of corruption. I think if those are able to take place, I think the future here looks very bright.
Okay. Marta.
Having listened to all the presenters today, I came to a conclusion that anti-monopoly work is very important, and here much is done by the anti-monopoly committee. I can predict that the bright outputs will be seen very soon. I think that except heating supplies in other utility services, we managed to launch reforms. Deregulation also is progressing with sufficient pace. What is the sector lagging behind? This is privatization. I think that privatization will allow us to reach the regulations, neutrality, etc. I agree with Russell that rule of law, this is what is crucially important for the development of competition. In my presentation, I also pointed out to the systemic work of the systemic cooperation of the Anti-Monopoly Committee with other government agencies. We know how to protect competition, how to apply the legislation on protection of competition, and quite often we lack institutional sectoral knowledge which different government agencies have. And that's why I believe that our systemic cooperation with professional agencies might help us. It's very difficult to mention one top priority, but in any case, decreasing the governmental interference or state impact on the economy, state influence influence on the economy, which is rather strong in Ukraine. Either this is a redistribution of the national wealth via budget, either this is direct interference into the companies' work. Should be lower. I do not say that we should not have any regulation, but this should be smart regulation, this should be efficient regulation. And of course, the judiciary, the legislature, the executive branches, they have to play their roles in this. That is, they should work effectively in the area of public administration. Thank you very much for your participation.